It's no secret that the film industry has been hurting recently, and badly. Where in the 2010s, there were 39 films to break $1 billion at the box office, averaging 4 or 5 a year. Well, since the start of the new decade, we've had quite a bit going on that's kept us from going to the theaters. Of the 6 films that reached $1 billion at the box office since 2020, 2 were entries in beloved franchises that leaned heavily into nostalgia, 2 were gigantic event films that enticed viewers with an experience that couldn't be matched at home, and the other 2 are actually kind of interesting. Barbie and Super Mario. And I mean, yes, they were based on existing IPs. Barbie organically reached event film status, sharing its opening weekend with Oppenheimer, giving us Barbenheimer. And Super Mario was a family-friendly film made by a highly successful, family-friendly studio. They were both great films and their intended audiences loved them. And it's getting rare these days to hear people say that about the tentpole genre of the tentpole films. Superhero films. While box office revenue isn't a good measurement for a film's quality, it does gauge fan interest, especially when it comes to a film people just can't wait a few more months to see it on their couch. And if you look more closely, you can see an actual quantifiable metric shared among the highest rated superhero films of the last few years, and it's the same as Barbie and Super Mario. Relatively speaking, their budgets weren't that high. Most people have written off Madame Web and will probably skip this film, and I am by no means going out on a limb to defend the quality of a film before it's released. But it does have an advantage that most films these days don't have, and it finds itself in a surprisingly rare category for the superhero genre, a category with arguably some of the greatest superhero films ever made. Blade, X-Men, Deadpool, Logan, and Into the Spider-Verse, just to name a few. They're all mid-budget films. Let me explain. To begin, there are a few levels of film budgets to analyze. Back in the day, there used to be an objective number to say how much of a budget classifies a film in each category, and that's sort of fallen to the wayside for reasons we'll get into later. First is the low budget, which is a film that receives little to no money at all from a major studio or investor. This is where you'll find independent films ranging from the likes of El Mariachi, which was made for just over $7,000, to Rocky 1, which cost $1 million to make. You'll find experimental films like One Cut of the Dead or The Blair Witch Project, or artistic passion projects like Reservoir Dogs or Halloween. If they're good enough, they can get picked up by a major studio to distribute the film, and they'll become cult classics for generations of film nerds to fawn over. They can also be regarded by critics as some of the worst films imaginable. Yet, they somehow gain a following simply because of how campy they are. Then there's the blockbuster film. What was originally referred to as a film that drew in such fan excitement with its fast-paced, larger-than-life stories, and even larger box office return. First with Jaws, and then Star Wars. And what set off was essentially an arms race. Each film needed to be bigger and more grand and more demanding of audiences' attention. What will get the people? This famous actor. What will get them talking? Better special effects. And with that, the budgets ballooned. Star Wars A New Hope had a budget of $11 million. Empire Strikes Back had 18. Return of the Jedi had more than both of those combined at $32.5 million. Then the prequel trilogy each cost around $115 million. And by the time we got to Force Awakens, its budget had to be more than every Star Wars film ever made until that point, at $447 million, making it the most expensive film ever made. When you factor in, say, the $20 movie ticket that is usually split 50-50 with the cinemas that showed the film, then all the additional costs for marketing the film and all that gets calculated separately from the production budget for, reasons. And with all those expenses, you can generally expect a film to flop or succeed if it made 2.5 times its budget. Just on that alone, Force Awakens would have needed to rake in $1.1 billion, or else it would have been a financial flop. Yet, it didn't. It made $2 billion. Now to state the most obvious fact of this entire video. No one likes losing money, and putting hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, studios are going to do everything they can do to make sure they get the largest payday after all is said and done. Money from the ticket sales, money from merch, money from the home release, money from streaming, and you simply can't let all those opportunities go. So studios will always make the safest bet possible with the quickest return possible, which usually means they're going to funnel all of the studio's resources into that big tentpole film. To them, there's no room for risk, and oftentimes that means the grand vision that the creators imagined needs to make way for what pleases the focus groups, execs, and ultimately, the shareholders. This brings us to the happy medium between the artist and the financier, the mid-budget films. While still being a part of the studio system, the mid-budget film is typically the smaller project that fills out the rest of the calendar year under the massive tentpole. But let's be honest, there isn't much expectation for these films to succeed because the tentpole will easily cover their losses if it underperforms. Think about it this way: if the blockbuster was artificially created in a lab to generate as much revenue as possible, then the mid-budget film is the spaghetti that gets thrown at the wall to see if it sticks. And if they can make it big, then you got yourself the next big franchise. This is also where the untested creatives get to make their real mark on the industry. The indie film may have been their foot in the door, but the mid-budget film is their calling card. This counts for everyone from actors to directors to the writers to the countless names in the credits that you probably missed because you found out there wasn't a post-credit scene. This pipeline to stardom is how nearly every single Hollywood celebrity got their name heard by the public. The mid-budget film can be more specific and daring. These films can be more targeted to a single demographic or niche with what the film offers. John Wick can be an action film about a hitman dealing with loss. Nope can be a horror film about the exploitation in the film industry. And Cocaine Bear, well, the title gives it away. And the best part about mid-budget films? You don't need to see them in theaters, or at all really. Back when physical releases on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray weren't becoming scarce, it was actually more common for films to finish making up the difference in the box office with home release sales. It's a bit more complicated today because the cost of streaming rights is absolutely a thing, but studios refuse to share those numbers for previously undisclosed reasons. Royalties. The reason is royalties. A film only needs to pay royalties if it's technically successful, and if you never say where the goalpost of success is, you can always tell people you never reached it. The true heart of the mid-budget film was in the prestige that they earned the company during award season. The melodramatic period piece about a tortured artist isn't going to win opening weekend any of the countless times it's been made, yet the Academy voters will eat those films up. A good reason studio execs know to let creatives create mid-budget films is because they know they get a shiny award at the end of it to gloat to all the other studio execs about. The only thing mid-budget films need to worry about is that they need to be very cautious with what little money they have. Less CGI and more practical effects. Less action scenes and more dialogue. And coincidentally enough, beautifully made practical sets and character-driven stories are what audiences remember more deeply than the car chases, the random explosions, or the CGI monsters. So maybe that's a good thing for good films. Which finally brings me to the superhero film. Comic book adaptations have been around as long as comics themselves, and for the longest time, superhero films were actually few and far between. DC had success with Superman and Batman, and later Marvel had X-Men and Spider-Man in the 2000s. Yet, the superhero film was still regulated to the mid-budget. If you really want to pin the blame on how blockbuster superhero films got to this point, there are only two films from the early 2010s at the center of it all, and they're not the ones you think. John Carter and Lone Ranger. The 2000s were a rough decade for Disney. The Renaissance had ended, and their animated films were getting their budget back, sure, but nothing was really making 2.5 times its cost. But the live-action side of things were taking off, with Pirates of the Caribbean and Chronicles of Narnia. Then, in 2008, Paramount gave us Iron Man, and Warner with The Dark Knight. Each proved to the fans that heroes can be treated with prestige, and to investors that these films can make money. So Disney bought out Marvel Studios in 2009, yet kept their existing distribution contracts that they had with Paramount in effect. The last two films produced by Paramount were The Avengers in 2012 and Iron Man 3 in 2013, which is why in the credits they still show Paramount Pictures, but I technically need to cite Disney as having the distribution rights in my videos. At the exact same time as The Avengers and Iron Man 3, Disney made John Carter in 2012 and Lone Ranger in 2013, with each of their budgets significantly larger than the Marvel films. And they bombed hard. When it was made, John Carter was the second most expensive film ever made, just behind the climactic third installment to the Pirates of the Caribbean, and yet no one saw it. I could tell you that it was actually about a Confederate army captain going into space, and not a single person would believe me. And surprise, the next fantastical Western film by Disney was also a dud, so Disney focused all their attention on their new toys. Oh, and also around the same time, Alice in Wonderland made $1 billion, so that's why we got all those lifeless remakes of animated classics. Same reason, just not the topic of this video. The Marvel Phase 1 films weren't ever treated like tentpole projects that they eventually become. Those honors went to Paramount's other films of Transformers and Indiana Jones and the one we don't talk about. The same goes with Fox during the 2000s, because they had Star Wars and Avatar at the time. New Line Cinema had Blade, but they also had Lord of the Rings. Well, Columbia always treated Spider-Man as a tentpole film, but at least they also had Men in Black to carry the burden of propping up the studio. That all changed after Disney's experiment with the Weird West to go all in on Thor the Dark World, and they haven't looked back since. Warner Brothers also followed suit after their cash cow, Harry Potter, had ended and they started building the DCEU. Fox tried to make their heroes a tentpole films, but quickly stopped after the Van Forstic bombed. And actually that film is kind of important because it was the first time in the 2010s that a superhero film wasn't guaranteed gold. But it also marks the first shift back into understanding that maybe these films shouldn't be the company's sole focus and to maybe treat the medium like any other film. And then the very next film Fox produced shifted everything around. Deadpool. After 12 years of development hell, Ryan Reynolds finally managed to convince Fox to give it the exact same budget that they once gave The Internship. Just $58 million, which was still less than half of the Fantastic Four and 2.5 times less than Independence Day 2 that same year. And after that, we got Logan, a brutal finale to a character that was treated much too tame, all for the price of less than Kingsman 2 also that year. And these two films each brought in the highest return of any Marvel superhero film. There were many reasons these two films were successful. They were well crafted. Dedication was put into them. Deadpool was genuinely hilarious. They pushed all the boundaries that no one had ever crossed in a superhero film. They were something different in a crowded field of films trying to one-up each other. And it probably shouldn't be overlooked, but they also had very little executive oversight, which is how we got all of the above. When Disney bought Fox, the mid-budget superhero film experiment ended, and now we're back to just tentpole flicks. Then 2020 happened. In order to recoup their losses from the theaters being shut down, instead of one gigantic tentpole film each year, now we got 3 or 4 from Warner and Disney each. And I'm just saying, no one ever talked about superhero fatigue at such a level as they do now. In the grand scheme of things, the franchise model of the superhero genre is built on drawing audiences' attention in to see every single entry. And if the audience feels like you're asking them to do homework when they're trying to relax, it's gonna sour them on the experience. Because each film is billed as a gigantic blockbuster, the audience has been conditioned to expect the same style of build-up that led us to Avengers Endgame. Having mid-budget films that can be more niche and can be more focused on personal stories are far more interesting instead of having to worry about if this film is the sole reason why everyone at the studio has a job next year. And the data proves this. I charted out every single theatrical release from a superhero movie from 1978 Superman to 2023's Aquaman 2. For Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, and that one from Archie. When you look at the films released over the years, major hits like Spider-Man pushed more films to be made in the 2000s. And then we see the same thing with the Avengers at the beginning of the 2010s. But obviously, not all of the subsequent films earned as high at the box office. And if you only look at the big picture like an exec would, yeah, that's kind of bleak. But what does have a striking correlation is when you compare Rotten Tomatoes scores over the years with its return on investment, and then put a cutoff at 250% earnings, and yeah, there's no other way to put it except to say that good films will always be profitable regardless of the money put behind them. The sole outlier for superhero films above 90% on Rotten Tomatoes to not be considered profitable is James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, and I don't think anyone would consider that film a failure because it was still in the pandemic era, it brought a lot of viewers to HBO Max, and Gunn is now heading the franchise going forward. So I think it did just fine. If you look at all of the Rotten Tomato scores underneath the average of all superhero film budgets that I calculated at $123 million, then most of the critically acclaimed superhero films are still up there. Outside of when Marvel hit its stride in the 2010s, a lot of them are still at the bottom, but you know. So where does this leave us at the moment? Well, we had Morbius as one of the few actual mid-budget superhero films of the 2020s. Sure, it did poorly at the box office. Twice. And the quality of the film is, yeah, look, I'm not going to try to defend Morbius or anything. All I'm going to say is that an attempt was made. And it was different. Different doesn't mean good, but still. Go banana! At the time of this video, Madam Web isn't out yet. So I definitely don't want to roll the dice and say that it's going to be good or not. Maybe it'll blow everyone's expectations out of the park. Maybe everyone's expectations should be exactly where everyone assumes it should be. Maybe people just won't turn up to see it. But the fact that we can tell ourselves that we can skip a film like Madam Web without freaking out if we're going to miss a vital post-credit scene actually does speak volumes. And I mean, I hope it does well. I hope it finds its audience, and I hope everyone who worked on the film can be proud of what they made. Because at the end of the day, all anyone wants out of a superhero film is to be entertained for a few hours at a time. But what do you guys think? What do you think the cure to superhero fatigue will be? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this week's video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more weekly content on comic books and nerd stuff. I've been Eric, and you've been awesome.